Practical Research 2, Mastery Learning Task Number 1. Unit 1, Qualities of Quantitative Research, Objectives. In this lesson, you should be able to do the following. Describe the characteristic of quantitative research. Identify the strengths and weaknesses of quantitative research. Discuss the different kinds of quantitative research. Evaluate topics that can be studied quantitatively. So, quantitative research. From its root word quantity, which means the amount of or the number of. Quantitative research deals with numerals and how it can be described a phenomenon or infer a relationship. So, quantitative research is the go-to approach for scientific inquiry because of its ability to test hypotheses. The relationship of different factors that we see creates a clearer picture of what is happening around us. These factors can also be called variables, which are the basis for formulating and testing hypotheses. Variables are the traits that numerically describe or give meaning to an object, phenomenon, or group of people. These variables vary or change from one thing to another. Example of variable are the height of a chair, the weight of a person, test scores of a student, or the speed of a car. Remember, vari- var- remember, remember, variables are an important concept in research. They are the ones that are usually identified, examined, described, or correlated with answering a scientific inquiry. So, characteristic of quantitative research. So, quantitative research deals with numbers, and the following is a list of characteristic of quantitative research. So first is controllability. Is to understand a specific relationship or phenomenon, quantitative research should be in an environment where all variables are identified and can be controlled. So next is generalizability. So it is from larger sample size that the results are based on as representative of the population. So next is objectivity. So objectivity is the result of the data are observable and measurable using structured instrument. So last is replicability. So replicability is the research study should be replicable by other teams or researcher that will eventually come up with similar outcomes. So now let's find out the strengths of quantitative research. The factual quality of quantitative research and its generalizability to a population becomes the basis of its strengths. So, Faria and Amidia, 2017, who are researchers from Portugal, published a paper evaluating the strength and limitation of qualitative and quantitative research approaches. So in this subsection, we are going to list down and briefly describe each of strengths of quantitative research. So we have analyze of data as assist with statistical methods. These are mathematical tools in which number can be processed to become more meaningful. Simple statistical measures such as determine the mean, median, and mode of a data set can also assist research in reducing the bulk of data to make it easier to understand. Analyze using statistics also provide unbiased result. So next is large-scale research can be undertaken. Due to many data collection methods that can be employed in quantitative research that are relatively easy to administer, a research with a large number of samples is possible. This is also allow researchers to make a more comprehensive and generalizable conclusion for the entire population. So last is, data can be presented in a graphical or tabular form. Other than statistical analysis, researchers can analyze data using graphical or tabular representations. Numerical data summarized in a tabular or graphical form aid researcher in making sense of them better. So we already discussed the strength of quantitative research. So now let's go for weaknesses of quantitative research. So we have three. The first one is a large sample size requires a lot of time and effort. The goal to generalize the result of quantitative studies requires a larger sample size, which can be an issue for many researchers. This requirement increases the cost of research and its time frame becomes longer. Next is statistical analysis of data requires an expert to perform. Poor knowledge or inadequate skills in statistical might negatively affect the outcome of a study. So last is quantifying and reducing observation to just pieces of numerical value makes it too simplistic. Numerical values can also answer the question of what, and it's often difficult to use these values in answering the whys and the hows of the phenomena. So let's go for the types of quantitative research. So quantitative research can generally be categorized into two, experimental and non-experimental types. These two types are used by researcher depending on the topic and the nature of the problem that's being investigated. Descriptive research. Descriptive quantitative research is an example of non-experimental research design. The focus of this research design is to describe factors, variables, or phenomena that occur in nature. For example, you want to identify the factors that contribute to the spoil of food. We know that there might be 1,000 reasons why food spoils. But the best way to narrow it down is to survey people that know about food spoilage. From there, one can analyze the data by using descriptive statistics by calculating the mean, median, or mode from the result of the survey conducted. For example, you observe that the frequency, the temperatures as a factors is the highest. It means the almost all of your research respondents say that temperature is a factor in food spoilage. So next is comparative research. This is another example of non-experimental research design. The primary objective of comparative research, also called casual comparative research, is to compare two variables in order to identify whether the excess and causative relationship between them. This kind of research usually involves two or more groups and one independent variables. For example, you want to know and participating in a school summer program is the cause of students' increased class participation. You identified two groups of students who enrolled in a summer program and those who did not. Then you collect data about their class participation. After analyzing the data gathered, you conclude that the summer program helped the student in participating more in class. Tip: in order to identify which research design best suit your inquiry, determine your purpose first in doing the research. So, next is correlational research. This is another example of non-experimental research design. Its primary objective is to compare two variables, then identify the relationship between them. For example, you want to know if there is a relationship between the length of sleep and student productivity. You can collect data for the length of sleep by asking students about their bedtime and waking up time. For student productivity, let's say the number of activities being finished every day defines student productivity. After gathering your data and subjecting it to statistical analysis, you found out that the closer the length of sleep to 8 hours, the higher the number of activities being done by a student. Through this, you can now identify that there exists a direct relationship between the length of sleep and student productivity. So we have also quasi-experimental research. So quasi-experimental research mirrors experimental research, but it is not true experimental research where a causal relationship can be determined with the use of dependent and independent variables. So quasi-experiments differ because the random selection of sample is not possible due to innate or ethical reasons. For example, you want to know the effect of height on milk brand preference. True experiments would have to randomly assign participants to group where they would be subjected to tests in order to know which brand they prefer. However, because height is an innate characteristic of a person, participant cannot be randomly assigned to group. Instead, you have to group participants based on their height. So next is true experimental research. The primary objective of a true experimental research design is to identify a cause-effect relationship between the variables where the samples are randomized. One of the earliest experiments that we have done is when we are trying to understand plants' needs. For us to find out if sunlight affect the growth of plants, we are asked by our teacher to create three different setups. Set A is to grow up a seed that will receive a sample amount of sunlight. Set B is a seed that will place where sunlight is limited, and set C is a seed that will be placed completely in the dark. Oh, excuse me. All of them will be planted in the same type of soil and will be given equal amounts of water. After several days, we discovered that set A grow perfectly, set B grow, but it not lent toward the source of light, while set C did not grow at all. Review. A dependent variable is the variable that is manipulated. Dependent variable is the variable that is dependent on the independent variables, and this is the value being measured. In this experimental research design, a causal relationship can be determined between the dependent variable, which is the growth of the plant, and the independent variable, which are the amount of soil, type of soil, and amount of water. In more complex experimental research, a large sample size is required so that result can be generalized to an entire population. This is done by the process of sampling, where respondents for a study are randomly selected from a population. Right. Just by reading a research paper abstracts, you can get an understanding of the nature of the study's objectives. A conclusion that attempts to generalize a phenomenon or a relationship can be immediately point us to quantitative research. Another clue that we can observe is the presence of different statistical values, such as the p-value or the Greek letter who that indicates a correlation of or descriptive statistics mean, median, or mode. If the variables is discrete, then it can be quantified. So the presence of the word effect is indicative that the research study aims to understand a cause and effect relationship that is attributed to comparative, experimental, or quasi-experimental research. That word relationship or correlational give us a clue that the research study is either a comparative or correlational studies.